Welcome, my name is Becky Given. I'm the Vice President of our Faculty and Grad Worker Union, and I'm that person who is frequently in your email box. Thank you to those of you who read the information-packed and frequent emails that we do send you. We are happy that you could join us here for the third of our webinars on remote learning, remote teaching. I need to thank our union staff, especially Jillian Tuklowski, for the amazing work they've done throughout this pandemic. And in particular, in this case, Jillian has done an amazing job of bringing together concerns, being point person on the survey, which we did. We'll put some of the resources in the chat box. We did a survey to find out what challenges people were having, which we've used both to pull together these webinars where we can learn from some of our sharpest, most experienced thinkers on these issues, and then also to work work on our bargaining demands to make sure we have some additional resources and protections as we move into the semester with remote instruction. So Jillian deserves special thanks from all of us, and members of our remote teaching committee, Danielle Ferrari, Jeff Lawrence, and Sue Sherman were the brain trust behind these webinars, which I'm really delighted that we've been doing, and they've been great, and I think they will live on as a future resource for us. So I am going to turn it over to either Jeff or Danielle, who will introduce our speakers and take it from here. Jeff is having some video troubles, but maybe he will audio introduce. And while we're going, do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box, and don't forget to check out our union website for numerous resources.
Great. Okay, so I will, thanks Becky for that intro, and thanks Jillian as well, just for everything. I'm gonna introduce, I'm having issues with my video, but I'm gonna introduce Mary and Chris. So let me just get to that. I'll try to figure out the issues with the video. I do want to remind everyone that these webinars are being recorded and that they will be available on the union website. So if you want to, I would really recommend, last week we had a webinar on access in remote learning. I would really recommend, if you weren't able to join us then, that you go to the website and do that. We also had a webinar last Wednesday. So I would just encourage those of you who didn't see that to do that. Today we're joined by Mary Chayko and Chris Nesi, and they're going to be talking about asynchronous and synchronous instruction. So I'm just going to go with a really quick just introduction to the two of them, and then we're going to go into a kind of conversation mode with Mary and Chris. And then we'll open it up at the end. We should have about 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. If you do have questions while they are speaking, while they're in dialogue, please put those into the chat box, and we'll get to them either, we'll present them to them either during that first 40 minutes, or if you'd like to make a comment at the end in the Q&A, you can also let us know, and we'll be keeping track. Danielle and I will be keeping track of that. Okay, so Mary Chayko is a sociologist of communication technology. She directs the Digital Communication, Information and Media and Gender and Media minors at the School of Communications and Information. She is the author of several books on the impact of digital technology on society, community, and self. Chris Nesi is a part-time professor at the School of Communications and Information and an expert in educational technology. He is certified in social studies and supervision and has inspired students and teachers at the middle school, high school, and collegiate levels. Technology and its role in education are his professional passion. So without further ado, I will hand things over to Danielle to start the Q&A with Dr. Mary Chayko and with Chris Nesi.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeff. So one of the things that's come up in a fair number of our conversations has been the differences between synchronous and asynchronous instruction and learning. And I was wondering if the two of you could speak to which course mode you prefer and talk a little bit about them.
I will jump in first. First, thank you for inviting me and Dr. Chayko. This is a fantastic opportunity to provide some great professional development, as we could all use some time and opportunity to always improve our craft. For me, synchronous instruction is exactly what this is. We are here at the same time, and we're going to engage and participate in learning together. Now, this is going to be recorded. It'll be available after the fact, but the people who engage with this recording after the fact, I'll be honest, they're not going to have as great an experience because it's not live for them. So when I think about the courses I teach, it's this that I thrive on. You know, I'm Italian and I love to talk with my hands, and to be in the presence of my students when I'm teaching is the biggest thrill. You know, I'll never perform in a Vegas lounge, but teaching is like the next best thing for me. So synchronous is, I think, what we should strive for. And I know Dr. Chayko is going to provide the other side, and there's nothing wrong with the other side. But what is different is what makes it fun. And there's a place for both.
So I certainly agree that there's a place for both. And I think that the thing to try to focus on is which makes more sense for you in a given mode at a given time in your circumstances. And in the digital communication, information, and media minor that I direct, we've made the decision to go fully asynchronous, because one of the things that's important is, for us anyway, as a like a large program that has multiple sections of each course, is to try to enable as much consistency among sections as possible. Now, that's never, you know, a perfect science, and it's also not something we strive for in totality. Certainly when we're face-to-face in the classroom, things aren't identical. But they're not going to be identical either when they're asynchronous, but we're going to be able to bring a level of sort of a standardization across courses, which, you know, I think is going to benefit the program in addition to benefiting students. They won't get a wildly different experience in one class section versus another. But for me, an even more important reason why I often will favor the asynchronous mode is because it will provide the same experience for all students. So with synchronous teaching, as Chris said, it's absolutely awesome for those who can be there live. But for those who can't because of COVID restrictions, or because they're working at the same time, or because they've got children and, you know, they just can't live on the same schedule as everybody else, yes, with synchronous instruction, they can certainly go and watch it later. But, you know, I worry about the fact that they're getting a different experience from those who are there live. I worry that it might set up a two-tier system where the second tier is, you know, supposed to be getting the same experience as the first tier. Not supposed to be, but like ideally, right? We don't want students to have to be separated into tiers. And we also know that those tiers are going to correlate at a certain level with, you know, with access and wealth and, you know, ability to do things in a certain way. So to me, it provides a little bit more of a level field to try to do things asynchronously. There's certainly trade-offs. I'm happy, you know, let's talk about the trade-offs so that everybody can choose what makes most sense for them in a given situation. But certainly when I'm looking to structure something for a large number of courses, asynchronous is one way of bringing about that consistency and standardization. And, you know, also kind of thinking about those students who wouldn't be able to do the synchronous type of courses.
If I could follow back up to that, I agree, but then if someone teaches their course synchronously and they don't account for that inequity after the fact for the student who can't be there, then I do think that that is a problem. But I do think that there are ways that a teacher could do a course where you have the students there, and then if you have students who can't be there for whatever the reason, you know, there has to be more steps taken to level that playing field. And it does come out, it comes down to, you know, what is equal and what is equitable. So there has to be something past you can't be here live, but now what am I going to do as the teacher to support those students to, again, level that playing field when they can't be there?
Yes, it does. There are additional steps absolutely you have to take. And I think the thoughtful instructor is going to take them. Let's also throw into the mix, though, our own workloads and just how much time we have to prepare each course. Everything is accelerated in online learning, right? I mean, I just think there's more preparation, more time spent engaging. It's a boatload of work. And so sometimes I think the synchronous can add that additional level. It can also add that level of work that, you know, certainly you have to take on. But I think it can be, you know, it's a thing to take into account, that what Chris said is absolutely the case. You know, you would want to put these extra steps in line to make sure that the student who can't be there live is still getting, you know, the best of the experience possible, the best of you, the most, you know, the best accommodation to that possible. And you do have to, I think, figure that into your own workload when designing your course and then implementing your course.
Maybe if I could jump in with a question here, just to kind of having laid out some of the pros and cons of synchronous and asynchronous, just maybe we could go just kind of in order with Chris talking about synchronous and then Dr. Chayko about asynchronous. Just what are some of the kind of tips that you have for the most effective way to teach, given that a lot of us have already sort of made some sort of decision about synchronous versus asynchronous, although I think a lot of us are going to use a hybrid mode. So just kind of like laying out some of the maybe best practices for those two different modes.
I think with synchronous instruction, what makes it valuable and one of the biggest pros is you still get that live interaction with your students. And you can still have those teachable moments and they can interact with your lecture or whatever content you happen to be doing with them. If you're the type of educator that just gets up and, you know, you literally just lecture and your class isn't all that interactive, then, you know, maybe synchronous isn't for you because it doesn't matter because you're not opening the door for the student to interact with you anyway. But if when you are in a classroom, you have an interactive class where you're getting participation and the conversation can go in any number of directions, synchronous allows that to happen. So I think that's the biggest benefit, is because synchronous is the closest you can get to that live, in person, in the same space education.
So for me, like one of the tips, if I were to give it some tips about doing asynchronous instruction in a way that I think brings the most live element to it as possible. Well, my first tip in general with online learning is to keep it as simple as possible, not to add too many bells and whistles, not to add too many different types of platforms, because that can just be confusing. But one of the things you can do if you're doing asynchronous teaching, maybe we should start calling it AR or something, so I don't have to say asynchronous 10,000 times during this webinar. One of the things you can do is still set up your office hours so that students can meet with you synchronously. And they can meet in small groups that way too, if they are available during that office period. And my additional tip to that is to try to maybe have 2 or 3 separate office hour time slots. So none of these are going to be on the schedule of classes, because with asynchronous learning, there's no time slot associated with your class. But you could set, you know, office hours Tuesday morning, Thursday afternoon, maybe even like, you know, a third one, you know, sort of Friday at an odd hour, and really encourage your students to come and meet with them this way then. And also, you know, I think it's important to tell students don't always know what office hours are. And they're sometimes reticent to even, you know, avail themselves of our office hours during the regular times. So being really explicit, either on the syllabus or in your introductory video, saying, hey, here's our chance to talk about the course. Here's a chance, you know, for me to almost be your tutor for the course and for us to get to know one another and for you to get to know some of your classmates. So if as many of you as possible can come, you know, into my Zoom office or to my Zoom hangout, you know, Tuesday at 10, yeah, we'll do some of our, you know, we'll do a little bit of instruction there too, you know, and we can really chat, we can really engage. And, you know, at maybe injecting a little bit of synchronicity, or at least the opportunity for that. I think it's important for students to know that they can reach you that way, even if the course is not being offered at a given time slot. Again, I always worry about the students that can, that can't, and that's why I would have different time slots. And I would also and this is another way that it can be very, very time consuming to teach an online class, but I would by appointment meet pretty much any student anywhere, you know, in a live office hour. So I would offer, you know, and just like the regular semester, they're not all going to do it every week, so you're not going to be too overloaded. But to be able to say, hey, if you can't make any of my office hours, drop me an email and I will FaceTime with you, or I will Zoom with you, or you will at least get to know me. But if you can grab some students together in a group during office hours, you know, that replicates at least some of the in-class experience. And then my other tip, my other sort of thing that I'll sometimes do, as much as I can in an asynchronous class, and I know Chris does this in his synchronous classes too, is have a class hashtag where students can go onto a social media platform, whether it's Twitter or Instagram, and it might not all be at the same time, but we do know that there is a good level of engagement and community that can be built up by students meeting on social media together, whether it's at the same moment or, you know, within a same day period. And, you know, we give them prompts and things to think about and things to do, and they can add photos and they can add memes and they can add GIFs. And, you know, we can do a level of that on the discussion board in Canvas as well, or on Sakai as well. But there's something about a social media hashtag which brings a little bit more immediacy, a little bit more fun to the experience. And I think that's a way of, you know, you can do this with synchronous or asynchronous, but if you are in the asynchronous mode, it livens things up a little bit.
And if I'm going to jump in with that too, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, Mary, I like that you use the word community. You know, that's very important when I'm doing my in-person stuff. And I foster that community, especially in the hybrid class where I only see them that one day a week for the 80 minutes. I think it's also important to think about what happens outside of that class time. So again, whether it's the virtual office hours, the other piece that I add in, I use an app called Voxer, V-O-X-E-R. It's a free app for iOS and Android, and it's a walkie-talkie app. And you can do texting in it, you can do voice chat in it, and it is an asynchronous app. You don't have to participate in the conversation live, but it's a way to bring your students into a chat group. You don't get their phone numbers, they don't get yours, none of that stuff. And you can keep the conversation going. And it's also great. I tell my kids, you know, you can send me a message anytime you want. I might not reply at 1 o'clock in the morning, but don't be surprised if I do, but I will get back to you. So I've gotten my kids comfortable with being able to reach out and ask questions. And in the main class group chat, they are able to ask questions of each other. And if I don't answer the question right away, somebody else will jump in. And again, I build that community, and I don't have to be the only one with the answers. Sometimes as a group, they will figure stuff out for themselves and they'll figure it out together. But that app has been tremendously valuable with the college students that I work with.
I think ideally, you know, most classes are going to be a blend of kind of, you know, what happens live and what happens when the students aren't live with one another, right? And I think we saw this even earlier in face-to-face courses, which is one of the reasons we've designed the digital communication information media minor to be an all hybrid minor, where students will do some, you know, 1 day a week in the classroom. The other 6 days, they're doing a combination of the kind of things we're talking about. So, you know, in this new normal, we have to kind of configure the ratio differently. But I think even ideally, you know, certainly, as Chris is saying, a synchronous class is going to have this asynchronous element where students can continue to be in touch when they're not there, you know, live, and vice versa with the asynchronous. They're going to, you know, the default is that there is nothing live. There's nothing on the course site that's live, and therefore a student who is working full-time or parenting and cannot dedicate a certain time period, you know, they're okay, they can take that class and they don't have to worry about not taking it. But if you can build in a few like live moments, all to the better. And certainly as the instructor, you never want to be so removed from your students that there is no live element. I mean, I just strongly would discourage that, you know. And again, not every student will avail themselves of it. Same thing with synchronously, not every student can be there at that time, so you want to have the backup. But, you know, some of the same instructional norms that we've been used to forever apply here. And I think that's important to remember. We are not totally reinventing the wheel. We're making adaptations as we need be. But the same importance of community and of, you know, being personally there for your students, that doesn't have to go away in asynchronous learning, and it shouldn't. One more way that you can kind of do that, have another really more personal touch with the student or personal connection with the student is, I know that for online learning, a lot of us record videos, and so we're recording videos about content, but you can also record, like I record these short little 1-minute videos of just me looking into the camera, maybe talking about the week, saying something funny, just, making sure that they get to see me, my full face, not just a little box on the course video. And I don't do it all the time every week, but I get really positive feedback about this. And you can upload that small little video to Instagram or Twitter if you've got a course hashtag. So they're not only seeing you on Canvas, I think it's best to keep most of everything on your learning management system. But if you're building in some social media engagement, which again, I think the students love and is a really cool way to add some more element of community and engagement. You can also put yourself right on there. Photos of yourself, short videos of yourself, sometimes just a little word of encouragement in the middle of a week. And I think that can be very effective. And you don't have to be there live for that. They're still going to see you one-on-one. It feels a little like texting sometimes when they just look at that video of you. It feels a little bit like they're doing a short little FaceTime, and yet you are able to do it in advance. And hey, one of the other advantages of asynchronous instruction is you can load up as much of it as need be in advance if you have to. And the teaching mode has to work for us too. We do have to care about the students, we do care about them, but I'm able to load a lot of my semester's content at the beginning. I don't always make it all available to students at the beginning, but I can work on it over the summer. A lot of it's done, it's there, and now I can just add in these little kind of shorter moments and shorter videos, and it helps me manage my semester better. So I've been choosing asynchronous instruction even before the pandemic. I've been doing online teaching in this mode for a couple of years for a variety of reasons. I teach, face-to-face and hybrid as well, but I will say that I have found the asynchronous, I've using these few tweaks that I've mentioned, it's been pretty smooth, and I've been getting, pretty strong evaluations from students. I've been getting good feedback. I haven't heard a lot about, what they're missing if you are giving them something cool in exchange. Let me also say one more thing. I think it's really important when we're setting up our classes and just writing our syllabi and setting up our Canvas sites. I think it's important that we don't focus on what's not possible in our situation. I think it's good to sort of, we can mention it, but I think it's good to focus on what we are doing and what we can offer and what is going to happen that's going to be cool and different and new. And I'm sort of reticent to be extremely apologetic about the fact that we can't be face-to-face, for example. Of course, you acknowledge it. We would prefer that, but I don't focus on that. I focus on what we are doing, what we can do, which is engage in these new, different, interesting ways that, that we're being inspired to do, and try to focus on what is happening as opposed to what isn't happening. Oh, gotta unmute, Danielle, gotta unmute, my friend.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to say thank you for that. And a big part of why we wanted to reach out to you and ask you to come speak today is because of the combination of the fact that you have been teaching this way from before the pandemic, and that this has been a chosen, developed practice of yours for a long time, and that as you're sort of pointing out in the way that you're thinking about building relationships with students, it also dovetails with some of your personal research, thinking about how online relationship building works. So I just really wanted to, first of all, say thank you so much for that. And then, and I think it's interesting that to open up a conversation that's less about the notion that this is a sort of emergency response, and instead to think about how this might have its own kind of benefits and offer some improvements for some students, if not all, or it can even be for all. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about how you think about online teaching and learning in general is potentially more, or not more, but what it has to offer that's unique from face-to-face, as opposed to it being a modification of face-to-face. Some of the things that came up about this in our last session were for students with access issues in particular, a lot of that being asynchronous learning, allowing people more time to think through content and return to it at their own pacing. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to what you think of as the benefits and possibilities of this form of learning and teaching.
What do you think, Chris?
Can you restate the question? I kind of got lost in it.
Yeah. Sorry, I know I got a little turned around there. I was just thinking about the way that we tend to see this as a loss or a modification of something that should be. And because you both have such long experiences teaching online, rather than this being a modification of a standard practice, what the benefits are to online teaching and learning in general outside of a pandemic situation. Just as I think some of our young teachers, I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chats from people who are new to teaching online, and a lot of anxiety about that. So if you could speak to its benefits a little bit. I hope that's not too.
No, I get it. For me, when I think of the benefits of this, and I come at it from the perspective of a content creator and, as a podcaster and also a teacher, is that online teaching, it can happen anytime, anywhere. So when you're able to do the things that Mary does with creating the content in advance, whether it's short videos or longer form content, you're giving your students the opportunity to consume that content and make sense of it and work through the topics at their convenience. And whether they're in the classroom or on the bus or in an Uber, it doesn't matter. They can be listening or watching and consuming that content. I mean, I know that I'm going to have students this semester who aren't in New Brunswick. I'm going to have students who are in other time zones, in other parts of the world. And I mean, one, that's really cool, but it's the fact that they can do it anytime, anywhere, and they're still going to get the information and they're still going to have a positive experience. But as for me, again, by day, I'm a high school social studies teacher, and with, a flair for doing live, I fantasized as a child being on the radio and not being in front of the audience, but making the switch to online and hybrid, even doing the hybrid with the DCIM and then switching to online learning with high school students, it's been eye-opening to try and, I'll be honest, part of what you said, it does suck. It hurts to not be able to have that in-person interaction with my students at any age level. But making the best of online and virtual and hybrid, for me, and it goes back to what Mary said, community. How can I still develop relationships and a rapport and get to know my students and, lead with empathy and understanding who they are and where they're coming from? That's almost more important than any topic that we'll ever cover in a college course, is how can we build those relationships and, go from there? Because if you don't have the relationships and the rapport with your kids, they're not going to learn anything past anything. So
Students have also told me that it not only gives them the ability to watch at any time, but to rewatch and to watch things as many times as they need to, or to break down a project and watch the explanation of what they're supposed to do several times. Think how important this is for someone for whom perhaps English is not their first language, and for whom things go very quickly in the face-to-face classroom. Especially someone like I speak quickly, and I often in office hours I'm sort of repeating and reteaching. And in this situation, I can always say to students, rewatch the video, or I actually build that into some of my course introduction. That feel free to take this at your pace, and to spend as much time with it as you need, or to pause and go back. And I often hear from students for whom English is not their first language, that they really, they find that almost indispensable once they get used to it. And then I guess the other thing that we're doing when we teach this way is we're also sort of meeting students on their own turf, at least part-time. There's no substitute for face-to-face, obviously, that is better. But for health reasons, that's not happening anyway. And this is where students are, in many cases, comfortable. I don't think this means that they're necessarily experts at using all of these platforms. I don't think we should assume that they are. I think you need to be very, careful and explicit in your videos to really give a full articulation of what you're doing. An introductory video at the beginning of the class where you really break it down and you really give the flow of the class, and also let them get to know you. and talk about yourself. And don't try to be perfect in these videos. Just try to be, look at it from their point of view and be careful and sort of thoughtful, and take your time with it, and ask for their feedback and incorporate it into what you're doing going forward. So, students are, when I think about students being on their turf, I think about social media. That's one of the reasons I love using social media in the classroom. And my research has indicated that, many students are really considering their social media communities to be like, their social media friends are usually their friends from everyday life too. But it also gives you an opportunity to reach beyond the classroom a little bit. You could get in a cool guest speaker. You could do this on Zoom or Skype or social media. You could get in someone from outside of the classroom who, wants to talk with the students. And there are many people who are willing to do that over social media who maybe wouldn't be able to dedicate the time on Zoom or to do a video interview with you. You also have to really watch length of things, right? Like, you don't want to do long video pieces on your learning management site. Anything that goes over really 20, 30 minutes, that's a long time for students to sit. Many of them won't even watch it if you do that. But social media, they can consume it in smaller bits and bytes. And remember that we're adding all this stuff together. Usually you don't just choose one thing. It's like a regular class, and that you're trying to, consider various types of assignments and activities to reach students in different ways. And yet you can capture some students in ways that I think you might not be able to in the classroom, if everything would have been maybe a little bit too rushed or too difficult for them in the classroom. They can take a little more time online.
You just hit on another important piece, and that's keep it short. I mean, I'm starting to integrate TikTok into some of my courses, and we're talking 15 to 60-second videos. That's kind of the attention span that we're working with, So again, keep it short, get in, get out, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, do what you need to do. There's no such thing as too long, only too boring. So whatever you're creating, if you're making it engaging, your students will go on that journey with you.
Yeah, don't be afraid to keep it fun. Go with your interests too, the kinds of platforms and things that, intrigue you, and your enthusiasm will be contagious. But, ask them and be in touch with what kinds of things they're interested in, and don't be afraid to have fun with all this. We want to elevate this and not just think of it again as non-face-to-face. We want to elevate this to being all that it can be.
Yeah. If you're not having fun, go do something else. Don't teach people. So if you're, it's got to be fun for us. My courses, I am, yes, I'm the teacher, but I'm also like student zero, like patient zero. Cause I'm always learning. I tell my students, on the first day, I'm not the smartest person in the room. And they look at me like, okay. And usually by the end they realize, yeah, he's not the smartest person in the room. No.
It'll take that long to figure that out, huh, Chris?
Yeah, but it's community. I'm not there to be, Lord of the board or, star of the screen. So in the spring, when we had to, at the flip of a switch, go to, virtual learning, I did that by streaming to YouTube and bringing kids on calls like this and interacting with the chat. And I was having fun doing that. I would start the classes, almost like I was starting a radio show or a YouTube live stream, and they were engaged. They had fun with it. And there were weeks in the spring where I had 27 to 32 students on a live stream for like 80 minutes. And we're engaging, we're rotating in and out, and we're asking, and we're kind of doing our thing. And to what you said before, Mary, then it was available after. There would be points in that live stream where I would go over directions on an assignment or review some stuff. And then when students would Vox me or tweet me or DM me, hey, what about this? I'm like, all right, here's the timestamp, just go watch it. So again, that whole asynchronous piece where now you have things recorded, you don't have to repeat yourself. If you're creating the videos in advance, well, I'm sure we've all flubbed a lecture at some point. Well, you can fix it. You don't have to put out a poorly recorded lecture where you leave something out. You can have the outline right there. So there are opportunities to be even more perfect in how you present the material.
Can I just wanted to jump in. Maybe we could start transitioning towards the Q&A. So I just wanted to maybe flag two kind of comments or questions from the chat. And then Danielle, if you want to, take over after that with the Q&A. So These are questions from, so the first one I'm taking from two things that Anna posted in the chat, and they're both about asynchronous remote delivery. So the one is that in response to part of your presentation, Mary, she says, it seems like best practice to incorporate Synchronous into an AR course, but then don't you face basically the same issue of access for students who are able to, say, meet at office hours or do some of the synchronous content? And so how do you deal with that? And then I think a related question is just also from Anna, there's a sense that maybe students who are in an AR course have more trouble keeping up with deadlines and such, since there's not an agreed upon meeting time and a sort of collective meeting time each week. So if there are any strategies that you have in order to get students to sort of stay on track. And then I'll just say the other one, and just maybe you can be thinking about it, Chris. It's Sarah's question from the chat, and you can look at that. This is one I've thought a lot about. She's teaching a course that's on policing, and so her question is about, this is a hot topic issue. I was also thinking about this in terms of like social media and hashtags, because of course hashtags may allow you to have a conversation on social media, but I personally might be worried about how that, sort of could snowball on social media. So Sarah's question is, what are some best practices to ensure that everyone remains respectful through online learning, right? Especially when you're dealing with hot topic issues. So maybe those two, you could start with those two questions, and then we can open it up. Danielle?
And just to add to that, she also says to make sure that it's respectful while also making sure that it's fostered as a safe space where people feel open to share and sort of explore issues, which I know is a tough balance in all classes. Yeah, sorry, just to.
Great.
No, these are all like really good questions. I'll start first about the one about access, live access during asynchronous courses. I think you can't open up your office hours to be live to students and to have different types of office hours unless you're really willing to meet with any student who might want to meet with you at any given time. So you would have the same problem with the live office hours as you would have with a live course time. And there is no set time in the schedule of classes. And even if you pick an office hour, it isn't necessarily going to be a time when everybody could be there, right? But short of cutting yourself off to all students in order to be equitable, I think the thing to do is to say, I will meet with any student. We will find a time to meet. Email me and we will work it out. You will have live access to me. And it's even on the Rutgers website where I believe the president first sets forth the idea that we're going to go mostly remote online in the fall. He says something like, but instructors are going to definitely try their best to still meet you students, remotely if possible. Mm-hmm. So I just think you really have to do all that you can to try to meet, students, at the very least with a phone call. That sometimes a phone call is fine. They might not be able to Zoom, but this thing, it's not perfect, but I think putting yourself out there, of course, if you can't do that, the back and forth email exchanges are the next best thing. But, offering to meet with students anytime, anywhere, via remote technology, usually I can't think of a situation where it hasn't been possible, where you haven't been able to work it out. Again, not every student is going to request this. So I think you're safe to offer to meet with any student over the course of the semester. And I say as often as you like, and it's never been anything that's overwhelming for me. Regarding deadlines, that's a really good question. And I just work very, very hard to set up my course. I would do this synchronously or asynchronously. To set it up, I use Canvas. I set it up in the modules. I make the weeks, every module is a week. And I make the due dates very, very obvious. To me, that's all real, just like organization and planning. And then I tell students at the beginning of the course, and almost anything that you tell them at the beginning of the course, you have to remind them from time to time, right? With quick announcements, this and that, to stay in the week that we're on. Yeah, you can look ahead, you can plan ahead, but in terms of engagement, you can't engage if everybody's 3 weeks apart from one another. So I'll have due dates for discussions that happen during a particular week. I put the due dates in red, you know, get your first post up there by Monday and respond to your classmates by Thursday or something like that, whether it's social media, a Canvas discussion, or anything else. And then I tell them, you know, and I bring them back if it looks like they're, you know, getting confused or getting off the week, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of that sort of monitoring, but there is no substitute for setting it up really, really super clearly. And I have not had students have problems with that if I really, you know, set the time and, you know, trouble to set it up with clear deadlines. Chris, do you want to talk about any of that or the policy issue, or I could also talk to the policy issue?
Well, I wrote down some notes. So I think it starts with us and, you know, modeling it. You know, when we want to integrate social media into our courses, we have to lead by example and, you know, do it the right way, or whatever the right way is. I often suggest that students create professional accounts, whether it's on Instagram or Twitter, especially on Instagram, because we all know they have their Instagram aesthetics that they dare not speak about academics with. So having a positive online presence and really taking control of your digital footprint. I will often go through an activity with my classes where we'll Google each other. And we often find out that when we Google ourselves, that you find somebody with your name who is a SoundCloud rapper, a DJ, somebody who's dead, and there's really nothing out there about you. So to start to develop your professional online presence in conjunction with a class hashtag should be a great way to have them thinking about the broader world and how they can start to connect and build their professional or personal learning network. And above all that, don't feed the trolls. If you're going to put a conversation on Twitter with your class hashtag, and again, if you're putting it out there publicly, you run the risk of anybody can interact with what they see. Don't interact with people who aren't worth interacting with. And if those people come into your conversation, there's another opportunity for a conversation you can have with your students. Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, I'll just also add that I have created actually a set of pretty explicit social media policies and discussion board policies. I'd be happy to share in any way if that would be easy to do. And I adjust them, and in a face-to-face class, we spend a lot of time talking about that before we even go online. In an online class, that needs to be all done, remotely. But again, I'm trying to be very clear in my initial videos, and then try to have an in-class discussion before we take it, off, into the social media world. So we'll have like a Canvas discussion in which we, model these behaviors. And Chris is right, we model them. And to me, the main tenets just to always stress are just, respect, and to give everybody the ability to speak in a safe space, but also positivity. That social media, and in fact the classroom in general, I don't think it's a great space for anything that's sort of really like harshly negative, cruel. We don't want to borderline on harassment. We don't want to be, it's not a great place to just really vent about something that's unrelated. So trying to keep things on topic is very, very, another thing that's just time consuming as an instructor in these modes is to monitor a hashtag and to just kind of keep up with what's going on. I mean, this stuff is not easy, and it is not quick. And
it's worth it though. When you put in the time and the effort, and again, you manage your hashtag, it is super worth it because you see the students getting value. And I will also tell them, tweet onto others the way you wish to be tweeted.
Yeah, and as Chris said, very important, they are establishing and maintaining a professional identity and a professional digital footprint that's going to serve them very, very well. We also, in our DCIM minor, we get them on LinkedIn, and we have them doing, LinkedIn activities so that they've got a really strong, digital profile that way. And, helping them understand that these are really life lessons. A lot of their life is going to be online, and not just because of this pandemic. A lot of workplaces are virtual or hybrid, where you're in the, you're in your workspace, but you're also doing a lot of work digitally. And so these are tools, these are skills they are going to use.
Yeah, so we have a couple of follow-up questions. A lot of them are actually around the question of social media still. So I think folks are curious about whether or not it's even like ethical to require people to use commercial social media sites. And then Lee Price had a really interesting question. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, if it's Leah.
Leah.
Advice on. Thanks, Jeff. She would like to know about privacy concerns. She said she'd like to use a hashtag on Twitter, but also wonders if it's okay to, if it's okay to require them to use commercial social media platforms. I think the concept of a Finsta or a public professional Instagram account is a good solution to that. So we may have covered that to some extent. But then she also has an interesting idea about wanting to ask students to communicate with one another in order to build relationships. But because she's in a writing department, English, I believe, she was thinking about asking them to do letters in like a pen pal. Oh, I'm going to actually Leah, would you like to jump in yourself? She's
You're muted, Leah.
Yeah.
Oh.
She said she
There
liked
you go.
There we go. Thanks.
I'd like to ask students to form pairs of pen pals and write and mail each other a letter about the reading every other week, assuming that the U.S. Postal Service still exists by that point. But obviously there are privacy concerns in asking students to give one another their home address. I could make myself be a sort of dead drop, but that's going to slow everything down. So I was just wondering whether you have advice about how to balance the need to foster relationships among students with the need to protect students' privacy.
Can I jump in just first about the ethics of being on public platforms? Because I always tell students at the very beginning of the class that, you know, you will be making a public social media profile and interacting on social media in this class. And if this is not something that you feel comfortable with, you should probably not take this class. I think this is more helpful for elective classes than for required classes. Do you know what I mean? For a required class, I think you have to be, you know, a student has to decide. See, we're lucky, Chris and I were teaching in a digital communication minor. So students know that they're going to be working in the digital realm. So to integrate this into something which isn't automatically digital, I think it's just very important to be very upfront with student about what's going to be required and to see if that's something that they want to do. On the other hand, I have had students who sometimes in the middle of a semester, not often, but maybe something happens with their account. They get locked out. They can't use it. I mean, you do need to have a workaround, I think. And I can imagine a workaround for a student who just for some reason was absolutely opposed to using this platform, or who, if you decided that you didn't want to make it absolutely required, because you can still, even without making a profile and without going on these platforms yourself, you can still search them and you can see what's going on, and you could like write papers about what's going on. I mean, I think there are alternative assignments that you could create if you wanted to provide an alternative for students who didn't exactly participate in the same way as everybody else. And I think privacy concerns would fold into that. If a student really had, I mean, obviously this is another, to me, this is a teachable moment and something that we need to educate our students about, that anytime they're out there in this digital world, you know, they cannot count on privacy. Privacy is compromised, and anything they do can be accessed, hacked, you know, viewed more widely. For me, I don't know if you agree, Chris, I don't think the answer is to just lock your account down usually, because we want students to be getting used to the idea of networking and how they may be able to use a lot of their, you know, again, more professional classroom social media use to propel them into jobs and careers and to getting to know people who will help them in these careers. And you can't really create that kind of a network if you lock everything down and try to keep it perfectly private. So there's really very difficult, you know, it's the same issues that we're all navigating every time that we're out on the internet. So rather than just try to protect students from it completely, I'm not sure, you know, how exactly we could do that. Try to be very upfront with the challenges and the tasks and the, you know, and the trade-offs, and fold it in as teaching. I don't know, Chris, if you want to speak to that. Well, I still think a little bit about the pen pal question because it's really, really interesting. And that's something that I've done or thought about. And yeah, the privacy issue of the addresses would be something you'd have to figure out. But I do like the idea of using old school media because you can use old and new media together. There's absolutely no reason why you can't. Let me think about that a little bit. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Chris.
I liken it to, if I was going to teach somebody how to swim, I wouldn't lay them on the ground in the parking lot next to the pool. I would put them in the water. So there are precautions you can put in place. Yeah, you could make your account private. Although my personal opinion is when I have students or I see people who their profile is on private, my first thing that I think is, what are you hiding? You know? So that's where I will then encourage the professional account, which you should represent who you are professionally. And obviously you want to interject some of your personal, who you are into that because, you know, we're people, except for the androids because, and they're not going to admit that they're androids. So I think it is really important to have them leverage these platforms. If they don't want to use their super personal private account, that's fine, but they need to learn the skills. I mean, Twitter is here today. In 5 years, it might not be Twitter, but do our students and do people have the soft skills of communicating in that micro blog short form content? You know, so if, you know, I'm integrating TikTok, it's not about TikTok and using that platform. It's about, can you tell a story and convey information in 15 to 60 seconds for, oh, look, Instagram now has Reels. So it's about the soft skills. And any way that we can get our students to acquire these skills that might benefit them beyond our course and beyond our content area, that'll benefit them professionally and personally, you know, I'm all for, and any educator should be all for.
Leah, so here's what I've come up with. I mean, I like the idea. And I think that if you got permission for the addresses to be shared and exchanged, you would have to do that, right? I think you would have to get explicit permission. I would try to get it in writing, have them sign something. And then I think if you did that, I mean, if this is something that you think would, you know, again, you know, develop a set of skills, because I do know that it would be relationship building. All communication, you know, has the potential to be relationship building, and it'd be in a different way. You know, putting pen to paper is different than keystrokes. And if that's something that you feel strongly about, I mean, I certainly think it's doable, but I would try to get the permissions very, very explicit.
Yeah, maybe that comes back. Oh, sorry. Maybe that comes back to your earlier point about designing workarounds so that if a student for some reason didn't feel comfortable sharing their home address, there would be a workaround already in place rather than they're feeling stigmatized by having to, you know, make a special.
Yes, but is there a reason why you don't think it would be as worthwhile to just do these with long emails?
A reason that would not work that would not apply to all courses, but I teach media history, and so at this moment when the U.S. Postal Service is an interesting public institution, I think it would be interesting to get them to think back to the longer history of correspondence courses, which didn't begin with online remote learning. So to think about the different channels through which remote learning is conducted, I just wouldn't want students to feel at a time when some students are very fragile and vulnerable as if they were being pressured to give their home address to a classmate.
I think another option could be, if it's about going through the process, maybe we can blend the old and the new together. Maybe you could require students to handwrite the correspondence, but then take a picture of it, you know, attach it to an email, but they you know, don't type anything, but you've got to handwrite anything you do and then send it to your pen pal, which I think is a fantastic idea.
Yeah, I think another thing you could do is you could have them communicate sort of each of these different ways and then do like a sort of comparison assignment at the end. Like, you know, what were the advantages and disadvantages? You know, what did what were people able to get from the written, letter versus maybe emailing it versus maybe tweeting it, or, trying to do different, convey some of the same information through different channels. And perhaps people could talk about, just the differences and what, what they gained and lost in each of those.
Thanks.
But Chris's idea is good too, like taking a photo of the actual writing. But there's also something like getting something in the mail. Yeah, but I'd be worried about the, postal service these days and things happening, at all on any kind of, you were talking about deadlines before, that it seems like that would almost be a nightmare.
And I don't know if you had mentioned this when you started, Leah, but I think you said maybe put yourself in the middle where maybe everybody mails something to you, and then maybe you randomly, obviously, have them send you a self-addressed stamped envelope, and then you send them back out to people in the class. And then you only have to give out one address.
So we are almost out of time. I did want to just flag a couple of things before we finished. One is that there's an interesting discussion that's going on in the chat about intellectual property. And I guess and it has to do with recording and who records. I'm not going to maybe sum that up, but just to say that for those who haven't been sort of following that in the chat, that's there. And I do think we'll be able to save the chats, but certainly this question of who does the recording and when it will be available is one that the union is working on, specifically within the committees on remote instruction. So just to flag that. I think also, Mary, just that there were a number of people who really would like to see those policies on social media. I am one of them. So I think that would be helpful. And then I also was just going to say, since Sarah's question about sort of how one manages the synchronous environment in conversations is something that I'm also interested in, just as something that maybe we can continue to have conversations about within the union, but more generally. I also, and I apologize for this, since I'm having video issues, I was also wondering what kind of people think about just like the policy on keeping cameras on or cameras off during classes. I know we won't be able to address all of those, but I just wanted to kind of put those on the table so we had many of the things that were on the chat. So I want to thank Dr. Mary Chayko and Chris for a really great conversation and very helpful. To thank Danielle and Sue, as well as Jillian and Becky for all of this. I guess maybe we'll leave the chat open for like 1 or 2 minutes, just in case people are interested in following that. But yeah, this is the last one of our webinars. But we're hoping to organize some things in the future, so stay tuned about that. I don't know, Danielle, do you want to add anything to sort of finish up? Mute, unmute. There you go.
We'll be posting all of the videos for each of these past sessions in the webinar series. We'll also be hopefully any resources that any of our presenters are willing to share with us. And I hope that that list of guidelines maybe would be one thing you would be willing to share, Mary. We would post there as well. And any feedback anyone has about what these sorts of webinars could do differently in the future. I wonder if maybe, for instance, they shouldn't be hosted on a site where there can be ongoing conversation, so they can become a place for people to actually think through these ideas in a longer term format rather than only having the time of the webinar and the chat. Maybe that's something we can think about doing. Yeah, just that. Thank you so much, both of you, for all of your incredible insights and for sharing your long commitment to this kind of work with us. And yeah, thanks for everyone for insightful questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great fall semester. Bye-bye.
Yeah.